everyone. Today we have our 610th episode and we have our world famous debaters. They will do debate. We have Professor Rob and Professor David Smith. It's an open debate. We will do debate on self-driven car. First, I would like to give chance our Honorable Prime Minister for today's Parliament, Professor David Smith. Professor Rob.
One of us is okay. So the House takes the position that autonomous cars can be 100% safe. Be aware that the House is taking this position with regard to approximating 100%, because no technology, no matter how refined or simple, will ever approach 100% of anything. But we can approach 100% with autonomous cars. Well, look at this time. We've done this before, but let's look at this time from the standpoint of common accidents. And by the way, as a side comment, if you ever want to research common automobile accidents, you'll quickly find that the people that seem to cover it in the greatest depth are law firms that handle accident litigation. They just dominate the information here. So the items that cause accidents, the top 25 items that cause accidents. First is distracted driving. The autonomous cars are never distracted. They're 100% on all the time. They don't read books. They don't look at tweets. They don't do anything other than focus on driving. And they can massively multitask. So even though the computer is capable of monitoring thousands, if not millions, of things at once, the attention it spends on driving the car is not circumvented. That is the predominant area that autonomous cars focus. So there is no distraction. Speeding is the number 2 item that causes accidents, and autonomous cars don't speed unless they're overridden, so that they consistently drive the posted speed limit. And even if the speed limit isn't posted, they pull the speed limit information off the mapping information that they have, and they adhere to speed limits. And so they don't speed. Number 3 is drunk driving. I'm not aware of anybody who can get an autonomous car drunk. Maybe high alcohol content oil, but you can't inebriate a computer. So drunk driving falls off that list as well. Reckless driving. By their nature, they don't drive recklessly. The autonomous, in fact, what really makes sure that the autonomous driving car doesn't drive recklessly is the fact that liability, as it currently resides with an autonomous car, passes back to the manufacturer. And so the manufacturer is motivated to assure that the car does not take risks and do things recklessly. It's hard to picture an autonomous car that would even pass on the road, but if it did so, it would do so with the inordinate amount of caution. Rain, well, I don't know about where everybody else is, but here, when it rains, drivers go just a tad bit crazy. Autonomous cars are trained to drive in the rain. They will reduce their speed and anticipate problems more aggressively. They have the equivalent of millions of years of training now done on simulation. And so the car is an expert at driving in all conditions. And rain doesn't pose a problem. Part of the issue with rain, however, is not just the slippery nature of rain. It is the fact that it includes vision, and the autonomous cars now use a combination of camera types, regular cameras, infrared cameras, and LiDAR, and can see through rain far greater or far better than a human can see through rain at the moment. And autonomous cars use V2V technology. So they're able to converse with the cars in front of them. And so if the car in front of them sees something, that car by nature sees it as well. So in a long line of cars, what often happens when you see an accident or a chain reaction accident is the first car has a collision, and all the cars now are approaching it at speed limit to something that is stationary. The drivers can't see the stationary item in time and collide into it. With autonomous cars, the cars all see the stationary item, even if they're miles back. And will not collide into the vehicle that has been crashed or disabled, nor will they typically crash or disable in the first place. So their ability to see things that have happened miles in front of them prevents them from having an issue when vision is occluded. Running red lights. Autonomous cars don't run red lights. And when in doubt, they'll stop and wait until somebody, until the driver or a remote operator tells them it's free to pass if the light is not working. And even if you're dealing with low visibility, the lights in a V2X scenario, which is when autonomous cars are mature, will be telling the car electronically that they're red and not to not pass. So even if the car can't see the light, it should know in a full deployment that the light is red and to not pass through the intersection. Stop signs is the next on the list, is number 7. And autonomous cars will always stop at stop signs. They don't necessarily have to, though, because the autonomous car can see far better than you can. Even if it wasn't to stop at a stop sign, it would know that the stop sign was safe, even if a human driver would not. But autonomous cars do obey the laws, the traffic laws, as a primary directive, and will not run a stop sign. And even if the stop sign has been removed, the autonomous car would read the map that there's a stop sign that's supposed to be there and would still stop at the intersection, where a human driver, if a stop sign was removed, would probably not know that was a stop sign street and would proceed through it and have an accident. Let's see, teenage drivers. Well, by nature, an autonomous car is not a teenage driver. They are now trained in simulation over millions of hours of road time and know each road intimately, so that they are the equivalent of a master expert in driving in terms of their training. And so there's no equivalent of teenage driver in an autonomous car on the road. Now, number 10 is design defects. Now, design defects is a problem because the autonomous car is a construct, an electronic construct, and how it handles a design defect is important. And what a typical autonomous car will do now, initially, autonomous cars were going to pass over control to a human driver if they ran into a problem. That does not happen now. Right now, according to programming, if they experience a problem, they pull over to the side of the road and they stop. And that will allow somebody else to determine whether the car is safe to proceed or not. But design defects could happen in a number of ways. It could be a physical problem with the automobile, brake failure, a suspension failure, a wheel coming off the automobile. There we do not have a great protection. The car will behave better than a human does in all those situations because it would run through those scenarios and it won't panic. Whatever the appropriate response would be, the car will take. But depending on how catastrophic the failure is, if the car goes ballistic, there's no technology that would protect against the ballistic nature of the car, except maybe an automatically deployed parachute system, or by pre-deploying the airbags in the automobile. So the driver and passenger would be better protected because of that pre-deployment, because it's not fully relying on collision sensors to deploy the safety mechanisms. It will deploy them as soon as it realizes that there's a problem and those safety mechanisms need to be deployed. So a better chance the person will not be injured or die, but may not avoid the accident. But that's a tiny percentage of the overall accidents, and we could undoubtedly still approach 100% of no accidents, even with that design defect problem. Unsafe lane changes, autonomous cars won't do that. They see at 360 degrees of the car at all times. So they're always looking at the front of the car, at the sides of the car, and the back of the car. That's the multitasking aspect of the technology. So any problems with regard to automobiles and other lanes, the car, if they're visible, the car will in fact see them. Wrong way driving, as I said, autonomous cars do always obey traffic laws. They won't be driving down the street. I still remember the old joke where the woman driving the street calls in a panic and says to the effect that all the people on the road are crazy. They're trying to run into me, not realizing that she's on the wrong side of the freeway. Improper turns won't make them. Tailgating won't do it. Now, here's a caveat with tailgating. What's kind of interesting with autonomous cars is they can drive with much tighter tolerances, and so they could tailgate safely. As long as human drivers are on the road, though, they will not. They'll have to follow the normal parameters of braking distances, because a human driver will breach the problem. In fact, we cannot get to 100% of safety with autonomous cars unless you get human drivers off the road, and more of that in a minute. Driving under the influence of drugs is the next one. Just like you can't get an autonomous car drunk, feeding it cocaine is probably not going to do anything either. ice. Ice is another issue where autonomous cars may struggle. And the reason is because ice can cause the car to go ballistic. Now, be aware that the first car that sees the ice will report the ice, and any cars that come onto that area subsequently will know it's there and either avoid it or stop until the ice is no longer an issue, or creep across at a slow enough speed that the ice won't be an issue. But imagine if you're going down a hill and it's a decline and you hit black ice. So the cameras can't see it, or they don't see it until they're on top of it. And then the car is on top of that black ice and it's ballistic. Now the car will do whatever it can to avoid the accident using whatever the best practices are it's been trained to do. It won't panic. But when something's ballistic, it's ballistic. And so in those rare occasions where you're on a decline and you're the first car that hits black ice, it could be a problem. But recognize the car will be going slower. It will be already priming all the safety equipment in the car. So if the car does hit something, you'll be protected. And so even if you are ballistic, you would be the only car in the accident that would have a problem. All the other cars that came behind you that were autonomous would be safe. The human-driven cars, of course, would not. Snow, surprisingly enough, snow isn't a big problem for autonomous cars now. With LiDAR in particular, it can see through the snow, and snow does not express the same kind of traffic difficulties that ice does. Even though it's not on the list, hydroplaning is an issue, much like ice is, but the car will drive below hydroplaning speeds, and so that isn't an issue either. Road rage. To date, we're unaware of computers getting road rage. We'll see what happens if they ever become sentient. But right now, the road rage is an issue for autonomous cars. Potholes. This is kind of interesting. Autonomous cars have a downward-facing camera in the front, and right now, this same technology is being used on police cars to map potholes in a number of cities, indicating that autonomous cars will be better at identifying and reporting potholes than people are. Will automatically identify and report them. So not only avoiding the potholes, but making sure those potholes are corrected so that subsequent human drivers won't be hitting them. But potholes are something that they can easily avoid, and not a problem for autonomous cars because of the nature of where the cameras are pointed, and by the fact that they'll be able to report the potholes and actually make them less of a problem overall. Drowsy driving, they don't get tired. That's number 20. Tire blowouts. Once again, a catastrophic equipment failure can be problematic for anything. But there is a way to handle a tire blowout where you don't have an accident. Typically, an accident's caused because the driver panics, hears a large explosion, oversteers, doesn't have steering contact with the road, and has a crash. Autonomous car won't do that. It will slowly brake and come to a stop. And tire blowout in a corner at speed could still be a problem, but recognize that the autonomous car won't be speeding. And if you look at the speed signs on roads that might cause that problem, they typically drop down to 20 miles per hour, which would not be an issue with a blowout. One other issue with blowouts is when the autonomous cars come to market in 2025, 2026, I'm talking about level 4 cars, which is really when you get to autonomy. They're not on the road yet today. We'll have airless tires. It's being pioneered by companies like Goodyear, and airless tires, as opposed to run flats, don't blow out. Their construction is such that unless somebody decides to retread them, which would become a problem, they will not blow out catastrophically like an air-filled tire. So that problem may go away regardless of autonomous cars or not, because airless tires would be used in cars driven by people as well. Fog. Autonomous cars can see through fog and will not overdrive their sensors. They will slow to make sure that they can stop in time to avoid objects that they cannot see. So fog is not an issue for them. Animal crossings. I put a infrared and a military grade infrared system in one of my cars a few years back, which by the way is really hard to do because you have to get special approvals. But the autonomous cars will have that capability built in, and that means they will see the animals approaching from the side. The nature of infrared cameras, they can see through light, foliage, and certainly see through darkness and rain and snow, and so be able to avoid the animal that is coming across the road, as long as the animal isn't hard occluded, say by buildings, and isn't approaching so fast that the car can't react to it. So in most cases where you run into animals, which is when you're driving down a forest road or a field or whatever, the autonomous car with infrared cameras will be able to see that animal and avoid it, and avoid killing it. I was just looking at a film the other day where an animal came in through the windshield of a bus, and the bus driver and the animal both survived. But boy, it will rake you up. And finally, number 25 is street racing. As of right now, autonomous cars don't race each other. We do have, at least not on roads, we do have robotic car racing, which is a thing, but it's still in trials. And that capability is not being designed to date into autonomous cars. Now, once again, be aware we do not have any level 4 cars on the road right now. The news covering Ralph Nader asking Tesla to withdraw its autonomous car technology is because that autonomous car technology has been oversold. The existing autopilot in Teslas is a level 2+ system, which means driver assist at all times. And it's not even the best. General Motors system is considerably better. But the problem with autopilot is it's been overhyped and it underdelivers. When you're talking about safety equipment, the rule is you under promote it and you over deliver so that the people don't expect it to do things it can't do. Musk has done the exact opposite here, which is why we've had a number of supposedly autonomous car accidents over the last few years, which is concerning and could set back autonomous car deployment significantly as people learn to not trust the technology simply because it's being oversold at the moment. That's kind of problematic. And so it's very critical as this technology comes to market that the technology be undersold and it over delivers, so people when in doubt find out that the technology does more than they expected to do, as opposed to what we're finding out right now with Tesla where it's doing less and it's unsafe. Now, the one critical thing about getting to 100% is, as I mentioned earlier, is getting the human drivers off the road. As long as human drivers are on the road, you won't get to 100%. Simply because the 100% the human driver introduces a fairly serious random element into the prospect. Cars that don't report what they're doing, drivers that don't behave the law, and drivers that can fall underneath a number of these underlying problems, like driving under the influence and distracted driving. And once again, you are limited to the physical nature of the car. So, for instance, if a car is coming on a 4-way crossing and it's coming and it's approaching that crossing at say 100, 130 miles per hour, and you're in an autonomous car driving the speed limit, there is a very good chance that your autonomous car will not see the approaching car in time to avoid the accident because it's approaching the intersection so quickly. If it's possible to see it, it will stop and it will avoid the intersection. It will avoid the kind of problem that I nearly had the other day when I was nearly killed by a semi truck who ran a stoplight. What I did that was unsafe is, as soon as the light turned green, I accelerated into the intersection, not realizing that the semi was not stopping, and barely missed being T-boned. The autonomous car will not do that. It will wait a beat and then proceed safely into the intersection at relatively low speed. And if it sees a car approaching as soon as the cameras are no longer occluded by buildings or whatever, it will immediately stop, and its reaction time is in microseconds. So even if it needs to back up to avoid the accident, it is capable of doing so near instantly while avoiding the cars behind it, something that I probably wouldn't have been able to do even if I'd been able to shift into reverse as quickly as the car was capable of shifting. So it will ostensibly avoid accidents that a human driver could not avoid, but as long as human drivers are on the road, there is a high enough percentage of potential to make sure that you won't achieve that 100% target. So you have to remove the human drivers from the road, and all the cars have to be autonomous. Otherwise, that random element is going to break it. And then finally, with regard to autonomous cars, one thing that's got to be clear is the only way you get there is the driver can override the autonomous capability. If you override the capability, you're running late and you now decide you want to speed. If you say, you know what, we can do a rolling stop on the stop sign as opposed to a full stop, and again you override with physical controls, that's going to cause a higher instance of accidents. And it's going to be interesting with regard to the insurance, how insurance handles this. Projections a decade ago indicated that insurance for autonomous cars would drop to about 1/10 of what it is today, if not lower. And insurance for human driving cars would go up by a multiple of 10 as at the same time, because now you have the potential for a human driven car to cause massive accidents, because as it enters a system, it can cause a lot of these autonomous cars to crash, which goes back again the underlying concept of removing human drivers from the road if we want to achieve that maximum impact of autonomous drivers. Is that, and you may have noticed that the car companies are now starting to go into the car insurance business, because then they can best regulate how to apply the liability when a car crashes. If the human driver took control, and they'll have internal telematics that will validate that happened, then that then the insurance will not pay for the accident. The liability will pass immediately to the driver. So there is a very real argument to, as soon as we get to level 5 autonomous cars, which aren't due till the 2030s, to remove all the controls from the cabin to assure that liability, if something happens, passes directly to the manufacturer, and there isn't this gray area where the driver may have panicked and grabbed the control at a critical time and then caused the accident, and then absorbed the liability and lost their home. So moving away from a user interface in the car will be critical to both getting to 100% and to resolving a lot of the liability difficulties that will otherwise exist with autonomous cars that retain human-driven controls. One final comment: Intel did testing about a decade ago and found, amazingly enough, that people were actually more comfortable in autonomous cars that did not have controls. The reason is because they weren't sure what they should do with the controls. When the car was driving, they were convinced that they had to remain alert in case they had to seize control of the car. But if you took the controls out of the car, then they kicked back, they read, slept, whatever. They were far less concerned. They treated the experience much closer to an elevator, which is kind of what you want here. You do not want somebody in the car to suddenly panic and grab control of the car from the computer, because chances are 99% of the time the result's going to be bad. So getting rid of those controls is on the critical path to achieving 100%. So the elements we need for 100% is, one, V2V and V2X has to be enabled. The stoplights and control systems in the city have to be able to talk to the car and the car to them. Cars have to talk to each other. Human drivers have to come off the road, and the ability for human drivers to override the autonomous cars, and for those autonomous cars that are now overridden on the road, have to be eliminated. And we do know that people do weird stuff with control systems, and there's no doubt in my mind there will be drivers that will have autonomous cars that will attempt to hack the autonomous car and then put it on the road, which would cause huge safety problems for everybody else. Mitigating that with security capabilities in the car, which are being developed, and assuring that those cars, if they go on the road, are immediately identified, are removed from the road, and all the cars around them treat them as the accident potential they are, is critical to getting to the 100% end game. It can be achieved, but it can only be achieved if those elements are fulfilled.
Thank you, Professor Rob, for your excellent speech. Now I request our Honorable Opposition Leader of the Parliament, Professor David Smith.
Rob, go through the list of all the elements, and many places we agree with what he said there. If I look at quantum mechanics dictates to you that nothing will ever be 100%. And he referenced that at the start of his talk, but if you look at self-driving autonomous cars today, one of the things is it just has to be better than human drivers, and we gain something. But there's so many challenges with it that I can actually personally begin to talk about there. And Rob is correct. One of the things that will help us move towards the higher percentages are cars need to communicate with each other, and they need to communicate with other elements. And now let me give you a personal example. Two of the things Rob talked about have happened to me recently. I was driving down the street and a car on a side road ran a stop sign and broadsided me. And I'm glad my car has enough automatics on it that it took care of me, even without the side airbags deploying. But, that was one where the sight lines weren't there. And even if I had LiDAR and the other things working, which my car has, I could not have seen that he was going to run that stop sign. So you see that going on. The other thing that is interesting to me with what Rob said is I drive a Mercedes S-Class car with reasonable intelligence in it. And one of my roads that I drive often on has a speed limit of 85 miles an hour, one of the highest in the United States. But what happens real interesting to me is I'll be sitting there on cruise control at 85, and all of a sudden the sensors in the car says, oh, this section of the road is 40 miles an hour, because that's what the onboard sensors and everything are picking up. And all of a sudden the car will brake from 85 miles an hour to 40 when the speed limit is still 85 miles an hour. And you're sitting there going, God, I'm glad I was paying more attention and being able to do that. And that's one of the problems you're going to see as we go to the self-driving cars. Is Rob mentioned a lot of elements as he went through his list, but one of them that is unique more to self-driving cars and intelligent cars that are not necessarily self-driving is bad data. And we're never going to really eliminate bad data, I believe, as we go forward with as rapidly as the world changes. Another example that I find very interesting is, again, when I'm using the automatics that are in my car, and if I go over Long Bridge with 2 roads underneath it, oftentimes the sensors will pick up the speed limits on the roads underneath it versus the road I'm in transit on. And, can that cause a wreck? Probably could, particularly if I'm on a heavily traveled road like some of the interstates we have here. And I've seen that happen on interstates. So you begin to look at elements like that and how that will begin to talk about it. So the 3 things that really have to happen for true autonomous cars working: you have to have perception. And for humans, that's our ears, our eyes, and really what we can sense. And as Rob said, in cars, it's really the cameras, it's the LiDARs, it's the radar, it's the other sensors that you have that replace it. Then we have the computing with our brain and the computer, but the other one's that's controls. And we use our hands, feet. In the car, it's all electronic controls, and it's electronic controls networked together. And as much as I love electronics and have been there a long time, parts are going to fail. And if we're in a total autonomous car with hands with no driving structure in there where a human cannot take over, what do we do on a hardware failure? What do we do when chips disagree? Does it just pull over the side of the road and park you there, even though you might be 100 miles from the nearest person to help you? And do things like that. So as we look at this whole elements of self-driving cars, how do we do things like that? And some of the statistics that are so exciting as you look at some of them. Now, there was a survey done in 2020 where 15% of the U.S. public says they don't believe there will ever be an autonomous vehicle. You saw that. And 42% said they would never ride in a fully autonomous vehicle. And 56% of those surveyed said they would demand 100% safety. And 60% said they would demand 100% before letting a family member go into the car. Wow, those are really interesting as you look at how to put that together. But let's Rob did a great job of going through the top 20 list of accidents. But the Eco Center for Transportation issued a report in 2021 that said driver error is to believe the main reason behind over 90% of the crashes. And that's a really good statistic, I believe, when I look at with my own perception around us. And so, as Rob said, an autonomous car has to be better than humans in driving. But on the other hand, if we have humans in there and they're responsible for over 90% of the accidents, how does that interplay? How does that work with a fully autonomous car? Because I can set all the rules to my heart's content in an autonomous car, but then how do we put in it enough of an ethics engine, enough of a predictive engine to go back and see how those going? And Professor Hayes had put an interesting question there about if the overall price of the vehicle would decrease with self-driving cars, or would it actually go up? Because as you put more and more powerful computers in it, as you put enhanced electronic sensors in it, as you go to more and more detail, going down to sub-millimeter type of LiDAR and hyperspectral imaging, which you really have to do to operate in parts of the country, will the cost of that go up because of those elements? And I don't think we've seen the study back on them, though. But let's just talk about a couple of the places where we can begin to use the cars and how they would work. One of the earliest adoption cases for fully autonomous vehicles, and fully autonomous with no one paying attention to the driving, is going to be the long haul trucking industry, where they're on interstates, they're on roads like that. It's well known, well mapped, and a couple of states have actually passed regulations where you don't even need to have a person in the cab on that. You must have someone on the truck, but that's for when they get off the interstate. But you look, and that's going to be one of the first adoption cases of this. In that environment, would it work? Most likely. Now, if I take that same truck and put it in downtown Tokyo or in New York City, would I have the same results? No way. You don't, too many options, not really well enough mapping, which sounds kind of strange, but because of all the nuances there, it won't be there. And so you can look at that. So if I go back to the 100% equation, wow, those are totally different elements. And the long haul trucking, we are seeing that being implemented today. On one of the interstates here by me, I see autonomous trucks being used today to go through from factory to factory. And it's kind of scary to see the person staying over on the right-hand side of the cab and the steering wheel over on the left-hand side, but you kind of get used to it and you're doing. But as you look at, as Rob said, the ethics of autonomous driving have changed tremendously. 2026 was a turning point 2016 was a turning point for looking at autonomous cars. And up into that point, there have been minor crashes, but that was the first injury. 2018 was the first pedestrian killed by a self-driving car. And you see those elements, and you see the outrage, and you see some of the actions being taken. And, the 2016 was interesting because it was a Tesla S model in automated mode, and it crashed into a white truck that the sensors didn't detect. There was just not enough contrast, and the background was high and things that it didn't sense it. And what was interesting here is the earlier crash with the first injury and that one, neither Tesla or Google would accept responsibility, even though it was clearly their software and their systems that malfunctioned to do this. And so Rob brought up the topic of insurance. I'm not 100% sure that autonomous driving insurance is going to be less expensive as long as there's humans on the road. And one of the questions that came up on it was, how would emergency vehicles or private vehicles needing to go faster than the speed limit be able to do that? Well, if I'm in a fully autonomous vehicle, are we going to put an emergency override in if I'm late for a meeting and want to go 10 miles above the speed limit? The common programming says no. But, that is a real world situation that I encounter all the time. If I'm in an area where, because of an accident, I had to go from 75 miles an hour down to 2 miles an hour for an hour. Boy, I can't go a little bit over the speed limit to help catch up. Well, fully autonomous cars say no. So you begin to look at, how do we make fully autonomous cars work with the nuances of everyday life, from things like being late for a meeting, an emergency vehicle, others like that. Would emergency vehicles always be human controlled? Or would they be autonomously controlled with different sets of parameters? And if they are, how do we put those allowances into the programming, into the modeling for the non-emergency cars? All of those are things that, as I look at the state of the art today in some of the autonomous programming, they're not quite there yet. And how do we begin to use sensors? With autonomous cars, do you take police officers off the road? Boy, I can do away with unmarked cars, because the cars are going to be talking to each other. And so you could have a station on the side of the road with police going, gee, Rob's car, are you speeding? Mark, your car, why are you going 20 miles under the speed limit? And begin to do that. And do tickets get offered electronically then? And is it given as a token? Or is it automatically debited out of my checking account at that time? You begin to look at these type of elements. Can an autonomous car make the decision to go on a toll road or not go on a toll road? And that's, it's something we make the decisions all the time, but if I'm in a hands-off mode, how do I make those decisions? So part of the reason for asking this question is there's an element of human choice when we drive a lot today. But yet, as Rob pointed out in his opening remarks, we're taking that element of human choice 100% away. And if that element of human choice is taken 100% away, how much are we going to really accept a fully autonomous car with our human choice being removed from it? Well, when human choice is put back in, well, it gets riskier again. And our odds go up. But, let's just look at risk a minute. One of the interesting statistics, as I was looking at this, is we're pretty comfortable getting on elevators, correct? Mm-hmm. But if you look at elevators, it has a 99.1% of having a fatality every time you get on an elevator. Well, do I want to be that 1%? Well, if an elevator in a controlled environment is there, it doesn't do that. And I see Rob Googling. I almost should pull up the reference for him on that one. But, should we get on elevators? Because shouldn't an elevator be 100%?
That sounds 100%.
Because it's so controlled in the areas like that. So we just have so many variables that are there. And to go to the fully communicating, integrated into the infrastructure cars, what's going to be the cost to upgrade our infrastructure? How can I begin to look at it? So there's not just the enhanced cost of a full level 4 car, but I have to upgrade the infrastructure. As Rob had mentioned earlier, the cars have to communicate with each other, but they also have to communicate with the elements around them. And boy, we already have on highways big shortages of bandwidth today. I would love to be able to, Sharif, participate in one of these with you as I'm driving from Austin to Dallas. But there's places where my bandwidth just go away. And even though that's a highly trafficked thing, you just have to begin to do those. And the area of standards, one of the Canadian cities just shut down
watch,
its smart
David,
city.
watch your time. You're running the entire hour, and I won't have any time to respond if you
Oh,
keep
come
going.
on, Rob. You went half an hour. No, I agree with you. I'm wrapping up. And so you get there. And how do we put the pieces in place? How do we get that infrastructure? Knowing we'll never be 100%. And that percentage goes down the more humans you have driving who are not driving autonomously because of that. So, can we ever get to 100%? No. Quantum mechanics says we can't get there. But do we want to make progress? Yes. But I think we'll have zones where you can use full autonomous vehicles. I think we'll have zones where you cannot. Until we take all of the older cars off the road, all the human cars off the road, there's still going to be that risk factor. So, Rob, I'll finish there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Martley, you will be the analyst for today's debate. So we are going for the closing remarks for today. Then I will give you a chance as an analyst for today's debate. Hope you can wait for our closing remarks. First, I want to give chance Professor Rob.
Okay, so closing remarks. David brought up quantum mechanics. It's an interesting topic because I was on a call yesterday with IBM, and they were talking about moving. One of the areas where quantum computers are being moved is actually into the autonomous car area
Yes.
for citywide monitoring and management. So it does actually have a play here at a citywide basis. The intersection example David Smith gave is actually one that's been heavily studied in autonomous cars. And the thing is, the reason the autonomous car can avoid the accident once the technology is mature is because the car approaching the intersection will report it's approaching the intersection at speed electronically. And so even if the cameras don't see it, the autonomous car will be aware it's approaching, because even if it's driven by a human, the V2X technology in a current car will be enabled. So the car will be reporting it. Number two, even if it's not a V2X car, the LiDAR will recognize there's a car approaching the intersection at speed and will not be able to stop. And so we'll know to avoid that particular accident. The only time you're going to run into an issue is if you've got a non-V2X car and it's coming in an area that's so highly occluded that the cameras cannot pick it up until you're actually at cross points. And in that case, you will have an accident. But as I pointed out in earlier arguments, you don't get 100% as long as you've got human-driven cars, and that would be a human-driven car. The bad data issue is something we brought up in opening remarks. The stuff has to be secure. The data has to be reliable. However, there is an overarching kind of a God mode concept that I mentioned with regard to quantum computers, with regard to overall management, where the central computer will be monitoring for aberrant behavior. And so very quickly, these problems with regard to cars driving over roads and reporting the wrong speed limit would be identified and corrected as anomalies. So initially they'd happen, but they'd be corrected by the overall system, both through modeling initially and then through actual practice once it was deployed. The failures, as we mentioned earlier, typically when an autonomous car fails, it'll pull over to the side of the road and it'll stop. The Tesla cars do that today. The examples with regard to Tesla cars, just recognize those were 2+ systems. None of those cars should have been driven without somebody behind the wheel. The reason Tesla didn't take responsibility is because the drivers went against the directions in the manual that said you do not do this. They argued successfully, I believe, that because the drivers violated the rules of their vehicle, that the Tesla was not liable. And in all cases where a human driver takes control of the car and causes the accident, or uses the car in a way it's not yet to be used. So, for instance, takes a level 4 car off road and has an accident, that will not be covered because level 4 cars are not equipped to go off road. Again, the cars on the road are level 2+. There's only one level 3 car on the road at the moment, and the level 3 technology isn't enabled in it. That's a Toyota. So right now, everything that's on the road except in test is level 2+. David pointed out that the car that Google had an accident and they didn't take responsibility. That again was because it was operator error. Now, given it was their employee, they kind of owned it regardless. But the employee had misset a parameter, and that parameter is what caused the underlying accident. Once again, human error, both in autonomous cars and non-autonomous cars, are what appears to be causing most of the accidents. Ethics is an interesting question. David brought up ethics, and the trolley model is often used with regard to ethics, but a modification of it. And the trolley argument is you have a switch and you have a choice of the trolley either hitting somebody that you know, a friend of yours, or killing a whole bunch of people who you don't know. Do you pull the switch and save the person you know, killing people you don't know, or do you know what's the ethical answer? The variant for autonomous cars is autonomous car comes around a corner, sees a school bus with the kids, has to choose between hitting the school bus, destroying the car and killing the driver, or hitting the kids. What does the autonomous car do? The right answer is that will never happen with an autonomous car. An autonomous car never overdrives its sensors. It would never be in a situation where it came around the corner and saw something that it was unaware of and may be able to stop for, because it would not be going at excessive speed. So that answer is moot. Also, if the vehicle is ballistic, then it really doesn't matter if the autonomous car is in control or not. It's ballistic, and then when you've got a ballistic item, control services don't matter. So the car, like the driver, is just going to sit there and go and have the accident. And the thing is with the autonomous car is it will not be overdriving sensors, and so the probability of going ballistic is very low. David Smith pointed out there's a 1% chance of dying in an elevator. Actually, that's way the hell off. There is a 0.00000.958% chance, a one chance in 10.5 million of dying in an elevator, and that I would say is equivalent to 100%. That's according to ElevatorInjuryLawyer.com. There are actually elevator injury lawyers out there. Go figure. But that's what I mean by approaching 100%. You'll never get to 100% absolutely, even with elevators. There always will be a small chance of having an accident, but you can get to 1 9, 2 9s, and maybe even 3 9s if you can get the humans off the road and mature the technology. We probably won't reach that level of maturity until well into the 2030s, but we can certainly approach 99.9%. Once we get the majority of human drivers off the road and remove the human error factor from the underlying problem. You mentioned long haul trucking. Be aware that long haul trucking is a level 3. It's probably the only area where we're going to see a lot of level 3 capability that allows trucks to drive on freeways, but not in cities. As he pointed out, with level 3, driving in the cities is not viable. It can't handle that level of input, and long-haul trucks will likely stay with level 3 for the foreseeable future, because they're very large vehicles, and I think the concerns about what would happen with the computer will keep level 4 and 5 trucks off the road for a while, just because if something happens with one of those things, they could do an awful lot of damage. I think concerns about it and the technology will hold back the deployment. Mentioned police. You're right. The traffic control would be non-existent. You would receive traffic tickets automatically if you take control of the car and sped. Police would be focused on keeping non-autonomous cars out of areas that were autonomous only. That's probably where the police would be used predominantly. The question with regard to fire trucks and police cars, things that had to speed, they've actually modeled this out relatively well. And I believe you can find the models online. What happens is the autonomous cars all pull off the road when a first responder is coming, and the first responder then proceeds at maximum safe speed to the area. The first responder vehicle would also be in that scenario autonomous, but it didn't have to be because all the other cars are avoiding it rather than the other way around. But it would be able to proceed at speed and driving at the limits of whatever the technology is. You may recognize there have been a lot of cases where fire trucks have flipped over, police cars have flipped over because they've overdriven the capabilities of the vehicle. That would not happen. So the accidents with regard to the autonomous responder vehicles would be reduced because the car technology would not overdrive the vehicle. Toll roads. Now, David Smith argued that you wouldn't be able to make decisions. Be aware that current autonomous driving technology 2+ systems, if you go into the menus, You select whether you want to go on toll roads or not. Same thing with autonomous cars. You will make a series of selections about what it is you want the car to do. You can change those selections at any time. But if you don't want to go on toll roads, they won't go on toll roads any more than your GPS system today will navigate you onto a toll road if you said no toll roads. And so autonomous cars will be the same. So you do get some choices. And the car will always route you to your location in the fastest way possible. So that'll allow you to at least argue that you're going as fast as you can safely, and maybe not be motivated to overdrive the technology. Again, if the driver turns off the limiters and overdrives the technology, the driver will be liable, and the other cars will be ordered to avoid your vehicle as a problem. Police will be notified, and invariably you're going to get a ticket in the mail. You may be pulled off the road and arrested as a problem. And that feeling of lack of freedom of being able to speed and create hazards for everybody else is certainly going to be a loss. But the children and adults that live as a result will probably thank you. David's right. Infrastructure has to be built to really get to 100%. The cars are perfectly fine without the infrastructure, but if we want to get to 2 nines, we're going to need the infrastructure. We can get to 99% of accidents without it, but if we want to get to 99.9%, we're probably going to need the infrastructure out. And 99, we're absolutely going to need to get the infrastructure out. We can't achieve that capability without it. And finally, you mentioned bandwidth. Autonomous cars work as a mesh network, and so as long as you've got the cars interconnected, even if you don't have cellular coverage in the area, as long as you've got cars in close proximity to each other, you'll have a mesh network between them, and they'll be able to communicate. It's not absolute or perfect, but again, it'll approach that .99 level of effectiveness if we can reach that point. And then I've got to go to another meeting and run. The government rests at this point, and I wish David the best of luck.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Yeah.
I will sign off on my final remarks. There's always saying there's statistics and there's damn statistics. The U.S. Department of Commerce cites the other figure for elevator accidents, so it depends on who you're looking at to look at your statistics, which is going to be the same as we look at autonomous driving, is how you put the places in there. You also have to begin to look at the other elements in here too, of how we integrate these. How do we upgrade the sensors? If we have one set of standards and we decide there's another set of standards, do we have to upgrade all cars at the same time? Because if I'm driving with 2 different sets of software, 2 different sets of sensors, 2 different sets of standards, which one takes control? I mean, we all know with our experiences with our smartphones, our computers, that we often get caught where we're out of sync on the different versions of software, out of sync on the different versions of operating systems, our peripherals. When we upgrade, oh, I can no longer use that peripheral anymore. That's going to be the same thing as we go to fully autonomous cars too. And the fully autonomous cars, as Rob talked about, working together in the standard, being the intelligent mesh. Well, I don't want to be a car in my mesh that's 3 versions behind the standards I'm using, because is that going to cause us to not be 100%? 100% there is too. But let me just kind of put a futurist hat on for my final remark. I love the discussion of autonomous cars. I would love to have a level 4 autonomous car my next trip from here to Dallas. I'd love to sit in the back seat, have my computer spread out, do conferencing stuff all the way up there, and never look at the road. But I'm probably too old school for that. I like to do those type of things. So why do I stick to autonomous cars? If I go back to the Jetsons, the program, why don't I go ahead and have flying cars? We now have the technology to do autonomous flying cars. There's multiple companies with the prototypes out working today. We wouldn't have the same type of congestion. I've got multiple lanes I can fly on all the time. And how would they be regulated? How do I get out of some of the collisions? Well, it's the same problem with autonomous cars. As long as we have humans on the road, we're unpredictable. As long as I have ice and snow, heavy rain, I'm unpredictable. As long as I have construction on roads, I put elements of error into the equation there. And you have to begin to look at how that evolves. And that is the key difference in how the regulatory actions have to take as we go to autonomous vehicles of any type. We can't just have rules for humans and different rules for autonomous vehicles without us being in sync. I cannot have fully autonomous vehicles if I'm not on the same levels, if I don't have the same software pieces there. And what do I do when sensors fail? You know, Rob's example was great, and the one I used on it too. So if I get a computer glitch, what does the car do? It just pulls over on the side of the road and stops. And you're not going to be able to override it. So if we think we have cars stuck on the side of the road today, let's see what happens when we get fully autonomous cars. Because I think your computer, your sensor glitches, the other elements that play there are going to push more of those onto the side of the road than we can ever predict. And I can just see the service now. We're going to end up towing a heck of a lot more autonomous vehicles than we do cars today. So maybe that is one of those growth industries, Sharif, is let's start more companies to tow autonomous cars where I can plug the computer in while it's on back of the tow truck and upgrade its software and do diagnostics and things too. Because that's the future of autonomous cars, is we're going to have to do a lot more there to handle it. So the opposition rests.
Thank you.
Fascinating conversation. I was sitting here listening to it, had all kinds of thoughts, including the idea of David talking about the Jetsons, because definitely I grew up watching the Jetsons, and I'm one of the few that comes on this show that don't get around by car, usually get around by mass transit or friends of mine and all of that. So I would love to have an autonomous car that could get me where I want to go and all of that. So maybe those days are coming. Just hit the big 60 in July. So maybe I'll have an autonomous self-driving car before I hit 65 or 70, since both David and Rob seem to think that it is coming sooner versus later. So maybe that day is coming, and I cannot have to just depend on my younger brother, my aunt, and others to get me from point A to point B, including the mass transit system, which I love dearly. I was also thinking about an entire industry that, if David is correct, may be eliminated, because if we've got autonomous cars, one of the things that we hear about in the kind of gnome of fiction, or the kind of like concept of fictional and real life, is crime. And definitely we've got autonomous cars, and if the criminals are getting away on an autonomous car, I would think that the police would have some sort of kill switch. So therefore there might not be as much crime, because if you try to rob a bank and there is a kill switch, then the bank will stop, and all along those lines. So that's one of the things that I was thinking about as y'all were talking, because there could be a kill switch for the police in order to stop whatever the crime may be, and all along those lines in that sense. So that could be something interesting. A lot of people may not like that notion, because they may want to actually stop and have that autonomy that a lot of people like to have. We'd love to have our sense of autonomy and all along those lines. So that could be interesting, whether people would approve of the kill switch and all of that. I mean, I could even think of some people that might not approve of the other half, like, you know, a parent that may not like the boyfriend or the girlfriend, and as soon as that person is getting in the lovely teenage lovebirds, the parent might have the kill switch to stop that couple from going off to wherever they might be going, lookout point, and things of that nature. I also love the conversation about elevators, even that's not about the self-driving car and all of that, because here in Durham, I remember there used to be the old hand-operated elevator that had the man that would actually get you up and down, and many people do remember the elevator operator. And we had one, I think until the 90s and all of that. The building still exists. It's an older building and all along those lines. And those buildings were not as safe as the modern elevator. So definitely we have seen improvement in elevators, just like I imagine we would see improvement in the early version of an autonomous car versus the version that we might see if we're fortunate to still be living in 2060, 2070, or something along those lines. So definitely a fascinating conversation. I was thoroughly enjoying both Rob and David's discussion, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Sharif, and get ready to get on out of here. But definitely those were some of the things that were popping into my head as y'all was talking. One, me possibly getting an autonomous car before 65 and everything, and that kill switch idea, because I know some folks that might not like even their other half going off to visit a friend that they might think is got something else going on, or the teenagers that they're going like, I don't like that man, I don't like that boy, and therefore I'm not going to let them get out of this particular driveway and all of that. So maybe David can talk to us next week about the notion of a kill switch on the cars.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. This is excellent debate. I'm sure our audience really like today's debate. I'm observing from the audience that Professor Hayes, Virginius, everyone like
Hey, you're outside. I'm ready to come out.
today's debate. And thank you everyone for joining today's debate. And I request all of our speakers and audience and everyone, please share our content as much as possible with your government agencies, with corporation and academy. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, for your excellent debate. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.